And welcome back to the Morning Blend. Well, the pressure to succeed in college can be severe for some students. The American Psychological Association says about 1/3 of college students had difficulty functioning in the last year because of depression, and almost half said they felt overwhelming anxiety.
So today, a guide for parents to help kids cope with the stress. Dr. John Duffy is a clinical psychologist, best-selling author, and national speaker on relationships, parenting, teens, and families. Great to see you.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys. Thanks
I
for having
have
me.
an oldest who's about to be going to college, and some of the articles are honestly quite startling. When you read about the suicide risk, how many kids are struggling with depression and anxiety. In fact, in some colleges I was reading, there's this new phenomenon where they have these names about being perfect. So at the University of Pennsylvania, just as an example, known as the pen face, which is the face you put on when you want other classmates to think you're perfect. Or at Stanford, it's called the duck syndrome because ducks hide their desperately failing pedaling feet under the water when they are trying to swim.
Absolutely.
I mean, it just must be, the pressure must be, because I remember there's a lot of pressure, but it must be overwhelming now.
It's become, I've been doing this 20 years, it's become kind of insurmountable. I work with more college students now than I ever have in the past. I mean, you know, and they are incredibly stressed, incredibly anxious, and sometimes, you know, there's risk involved, right? Because you reach the point where you become hopeless and suicidal. So it's incumbent upon all of us to intervene when we can, for sure.
That statistic that we kind of talked about earlier, that 30% of those who seek help for mental, help, they've said that they have been at some point suicidal in their life. I think that's a very big number.
It is.
When does the pressure start? When is this beginning for students?
I'd like to say that it starts, freshman year in college, but really I see it start beginning of middle school.
Really?
Yeah, really I do. In the age of like Snapchat and Instagram, this drive to be perfect, just to fit in, you know what I mean? Like to look thin enough, to be smart enough, to be popular enough. That pressure comes earlier and earlier and earlier. A generation ago, I would have said, late high school, early college. Now, it's 5-6 years before that.
And how much is social media exacerbating the problem?
It definitely is a sign of the times. I've worked with kids who say they will spend half an hour looking for the perfect Snapchat angle, or Instagram angle to look perfect. And that's the pressure, is they feel like they are not good enough, right? Either academically, socially, whether they have enough likes, whether they're popular enough. These kids feel like they are not good enough, and that is a problem.
So it's not really just about grades here or succeeding in college. It's that whole overview, that entire picture of how perfect their life is.
Absolutely, it's pervasive, and part of it has to do with what we as parents think of them as well. Our egos get involved with how well our kids do, and so we unwittingly sometimes put pressure on our kids.
Right.
And so we have to be self-aware enough to pull back on that and recognize they're under a lot of pressure, even if it seems like they're not. Yeah.
And what's going on in college? Is there something about this time in a person's life that's particularly stressful, or the fact that, getting into a college, or what is it that's making it so tough for kids?
If you think about it, there are more millennials than there are guys my age, right? So it's harder to get in. It's harder to stay in. The curriculum has gotten much more difficult. And then you add like the social media age and the drinking at an earlier age and the binge drinking and all the social connection pressures. And it is overwhelming to so many kids. And this being their first time away from home on a regular basis, if they're not resilient going in, it's going to be really hard for them to be resilient and gain resilience once they are in. Yeah.
How are they coping? What are they doing to self-soothe? What do you see in your practice?
Well, some kids are really adaptive, right, and really resilient, and so they will protect time to exercise, to hang out with their friends. Other kids cope really poorly. They'll smoke pot, they'll drink too much, they'll party too much, they'll get lost in all of that and neglect that other part of their lives altogether, to the point where some of them are back on my couch by like October or November of freshman year, trying to figure out what went wrong and piece their lives back together. So the risks are big.
I'm glad you mentioned the freshman year thing, because Huffington Post did an interesting article called "The Dark Side of the College Game" about how many freshmen in particular leave after their first year or before their first year even ends, all stressed out. And there was another article called "Bursting from the Pressure." And so I think we have to, some stress is part of life, but it's about finding a balance between, trying to succeed and reaching your potential.
Right. Yeah. You know, I think kids feel this pressure to be perfect without any recognition that they're good enough and they're in process, right? You know, and so as parents and as college students ourselves and as professors, we have to recognize, like, we cannot put pressure on these kids to be perfect. If they're doing their best, they're doing their best. And they need a whole lot of support. And for college kids watching, don't be afraid to use the counseling center on campus, because those are really, really great resources to help carry you through that school year.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I had this a conversation this last weekend with someone who has a 17-year-old, and she was saying, you know, the pressure to be able to tell people what she wants to be or do as a junior in high school is really stressing her out. And so she doesn't know what to say. She doesn't want to give a fake answer. But she wants to be able to give an answer. So, you know, when you're talking to parents too, because there's also, I think, that pressure on parents to say, this is what my child wants to do, this is where they're going to go to college. How do you give advice to a 17-year-old and, you know, say, should they expect to know what they want to do, and advice to parents as well?
I'm laughing almost because the absurdity of knowing what you're going to do with the rest of your life.
Even at 21.
17, right, at 21.
When you're a senior.
You know, or well beyond that, you know, like I think some of us are still trying to figure it out. There's a great Time magazine article that suggests that kids today will have 4 or 5 careers over the course of their lives, some of which haven't been invented yet.
Exactly.
You know? And so I usually prompt kids that, you know, you don't have to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You just need to think about what you want to do next, what you want to do first. And you can always have a learning curve, and you can always have a next thing. And if you can kind of open your mind up to the idea that you're learning and in process, you can accept that. If you feel like, I have to be perfect right now, I have to know what my life is going to look like right now at 17 when I'm not even fully developed yet, it's absurd. It's an absurd thing to ask of kids.
It's true. My oldest is 17. She said, all my friends know what they're going to do. Like, what's wrong with me that I don't know what I'm going to... And I said, you know what? More than half of them will change their minds.
Yeah, so you're just being honest with yourself.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. And I worry about the 17-year-old who says he or she knows what they want to do, because I think that's something that's, you know, kind of input into them from somewhere else, not from something organic within them.
Absolutely. People can check out your podcast on your website. It's drjohnduffy.com. That's where you can go to click on those podcasts and read more, because the new title of them is Undue Anxiety.
Correct.
People click on those little things and they can listen to more of your advice, which is great. Always wonderful to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.